Okay, everyone. So today we're going to be talking about Robert Casanello's Avoiding Jim Crow, primarily focusing on Florida's railroads and streetcars. In the article, Casanello focuses primarily on Florida during 1880 all the way up until 1905. Most of the research consists of talking about Jacksonville and Tampa. He chooses to write about this specific era in the civil rights movement because it lays the groundwork for the modern civil rights movement. However, there's little literary focus on this specific period prior to the beginning of the modern civil rights movement. In addition, he argues that Plessy v. Ferguson was one of the most pivotal cases in catalyzing the civil rights movement, but we're going to discuss that more in depth further down the presentation. And lastly, Casanello argues that during the turn of the century, activists were essential for slowing the development of Jim Crow segregation. During this time, there was also a large focus on separate rather than equal, and during the late 1800s and early 1900s, many black activists fought to define what equal meant and then advocated for equal treatment to be as enforced as separate was. So in summary, Casanello points to the early roots of the modern civil rights movement. He states that it's unclear the origins of the civil rights movement. However, this specific period differs from the modern civil rights movement. Krogstad and Lichtenstein argue that urbanization was a catalyst for the modern civil rights movement because it produced many experiences of discrimination for black individuals, while Morris argues that the modern civil rights movement can be defined because of the large numbers of black individuals who challenged discrimination through organizing and nonviolence. In 1996, Plessy v. Ferguson was passed, bringing segregation into public transportation, and it stated that transportation would be separate but equal and was pivotal in defining the civil rights movement. However, as early as 1880, conductors began enforcing segregation to mitigate conflict between white and black individuals. So in 1880, black cars were commonly referred to as smoking cars because white individuals would enter this space and partake in smoking, drinking, talking about sex, even propositioning black women for sexual acts within the black cars. However, any black individual, even highly esteemed within the public sphere, who tried to enter white cars were met with violence. The only exception was given to black nurses and servants who were permitted to be in white cars with their employers, and Casanello argues that this set the tone that black servitude would be rewarded, while within white society and independence would not be. Black elites felt that their car did not meet the title equal because white individuals would enter black cars. However, there was no black first-class car. But when they advocated to also have the same standards within their cars, the Florida government did not meet their demands, and it didn't go anywhere. So in 1901, streetcar segregation became a law, despite black leaders who tried to stop it. They blamed poor black individuals for the altercation on train cars for sitting next to white individuals to appeal to the mayor's bias. However, it was signed into law anyways, and after it was, black activists decided to turn their attention to boycotting streetcars and creating a transportation system for black neighborhoods. In 1902, a big conglomerate, Stone & Webster, began buying up the streetcar lines in Florida, and at this time there was no enforced segregation on cars, but rather conductors would tell people where to sit. In 1904, the Tampa Electric Company told conductors to seat black patrons in the rear 4 seats if they went through prominent black neighborhoods. However, this obviously caused a lot of conflict and was met with backlash, so the company suspended this policy. But in 1905, a lot happened, and one of them was the Avery Law being passed that required statewide segregation. Black leaders again tried to appeal that this issue was within poor Black individuals and should not apply to wealthy Black people. But once again, their demands were not met, and it became clear that white politicians did not stand and would not stand up against segregation. Some cities were more likely to enforce the segregation, however, and Tampa was one of these cities, largely because of its Cuban population. Baldwin, who was the manager of the Southeast Corporations for Stone & Webster, advised conductors not to separate Afro-Cubans. However, they did not listen, and they did so anyways, and after, again, it was met with a lot of backlash and recourse, and again, the boycotts began. But this time, it included advocating for all Black individuals, not only wealthy Black individuals. Baldwin also agreed to fund Wetmore's case against the constitutionality of the Avery Law. He wanted to argue that the Avery Law violated the 14th Amendment by not providing equal citizenship, as Black individuals could sit on white cars with their employers, hypothetically discriminated against white people. Of course, since white people were being discriminated against, the court deemed this law unconstitutional. However, that ruling did not benefit Black individuals. Instead, the court removed all exceptions for Black people seated in white cars. So there were a few anecdotes that really stuck out to me. The first was concerning a young Black woman named Williams who was being forced into a smoking car. She argued that because she was dressed decently, like a lady, that she deserved to sit in first class, and brought the suit against the railroad company where she represented herself. Originally, they were not going to let her because she was a ward of her husband, and therefore meant he had to testify on her behalf. However, the lawyer granted her the right to defend herself. She argued that when she was dragged face down by her legs, she suffered permanent injury to her womanhood and therefore could not maintain housework or sexual intimacy with her husband. Both of these were considered womanly duties at the time. However, the Florida Supreme Court did not recognize Black women as having the same virtues as white women, and the case was dismissed. On July 11th, Kennedy was involved with an altercation with a Black woman who newspapers and documents did not state the name of, but Kennedy had said that he wished that the company would enforce segregation, and the Black woman saying near him said that she deserved the same and equal treatment that he did, and he punched her in the face. Newspapers at the time twisted the stories. Some said that she called him derogatory names, while others said that she sat too close to him wearing strong perfume that provoked him. However, none of them adequately placed blame on the white man. And to make matters worse, she was charged $2.50 for disturbing the peace, and he was charged $5 for hitting a woman. The last anecdote speaks to the abuse that conductors enforced. Black individuals were concerned about segregation laws on transportation to begin with, out of fear that they would give conductors policing power. In one instance, Waldron, who was a Baptist reverend, his daughter was pushed from a streetcar by a conductor, and she suffered numerous injuries and died a few months later. These anecdotes are really important because they provide primary accounts of individual racism and aggression that took place because of transportation segregation. What I found most interesting was the large role that Black women played, specifically Black women of privilege. Many times it was Black women who would take train companies and conductors to civil courts, which I thought was amazing considering the intersectionality between gender discrimination and racism. Black women were also not met with the same level of resistance as Black men, though they still faced significant amounts of violence, like we talked about in the previous slide. Casanello argues that because they were met with less aggression than Black men, they were more influential in acts of civil disobedience. And then some discussion questions. The first is what are some possible connections you see between women in both South Africa and in the 1900s United States? And then the second one is owners of trains companies decided to enforce segregation to mitigate conflict. Was this an effective idea? Who did these laws infer blame to for conflict? And how does this relate to stereotypes and privilege? All right. And thank you for watching. Have a great day.